technical difficulties?
Yeah. Well, we're going to say, and we're back in the room.
Yes, we seem to have had a minor technical difficulty, but we're still here and we're ready to start answering questions. So, shall I read the first one?
Well, I reckon it was Sousa operatives, the old Socialist Union of
rabble-rousers,
South America. Yeah, absolutely. That's what was causing it. Yeah, go on. So let's kick off. The way we structured it is we have, because we thought a bit of structure might help, is we're going to take an overall topic. So we're going to start with generally the dystopian age. So we'll talk about narrative and how things all fit together in the dystopian age. And so taking questions on that. Of course, we can only structure it based on the comments and questions that have been made so far. So during the live stream, so as we're now talking, any questions that come in, if you want to start to talk about a general narrative point or something like that for the dystopian age, but we've moved on to Armoured Clash or one of the other topics, don't worry, we will keep jumping back, as it were, but we're trying to keep the major chunks of the questions together. So hopefully,
yeah. So please give us more questions as we're going along. They will appear on our screen, and if possible, we'll get to them and give you an answer as well. So the first question that we have is from Bradley Morris. With the idea of this being a relaunch of the game, I'm assuming there will be lots of events that will have displays of the game as well as demos. Any idea what events you are looking at attending, and will the company be looking for any local assistance in displaying the game or demo sets that can be purchased to advertise the dystopian age?
Yes. I'll elaborate. What we're looking to do, so we have a program we're working on at the moment called the Warhost program. Some of the games that we have under our wing now have had different types of community schemes and things running in the past. That's not been with varying success and varying objectives and things. What we're trying to do is we're trying to create something now with the Warhost program, which will cover not just everything under the dystopian age, but obviously there are other games and other brands that we're developing as part of Warcradle Studios, and it will support those as well. That takes a little bit of time to get right, because there's no point kicking something off for it to not be the way it's supposed to be, and then we have to start it all over again, much like this video. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the time and really make sure it does exactly how we want it, how it behaves, how we want it to behave. It's nearly there. It's very, very nearly there. We're just going through the last couple of drafts on it. Once that's in place, the idea will be that volunteers will be able to join as a war host, and then that will then give you all the tools, all the support you need to go out there into the communities as volunteers and really start to generate up that interest and help your local stores and help out at events and so on. Speaking of events though, loads of events we've got planned. We're coming out. We have the Trailblazer program, which will still continue through 2018 and beyond. The Trailblazers originally began to support Wild West Exodus. It will absolutely be supporting all the other games that we're working on and developing. So for Dystopian Wars, the Trailblazers will be running things. They'll be running things for Armoured Clash and other games that we are at the moment working on. So that's all still to come. In terms of big shows and things, our show attendance works out into a couple of ways.
I mean, definitely we will be at Adepticon 2018, won't we?
Definitely at Adepticon, assuming that all of the applications and things are confirmed, because even though Spartan has been attending various bits and pieces, and some of the other games that have been there in varying capacities. Wild West Exodus was at Adepticon last year, but Warcradle as a company, as a brand, hasn't been at Adepticon in any kind of meaningful way. So this would be our first year, and so because of that, there's a couple more hoops we have to jump through. So we'll be able to confirm exact details in the new year, but it is absolutely our intention. We want to be at Adepticon in some capacity or another. But there's loads of other shows as well. We've got in the UK, we've got Salute,
UK Games
Expo. Then back in the US, we're in PAX. We're at PAX South in January. So a few weeks' time, I shall be packing my little knapsack over my shoulder and hiking halfway around the world. We've also got a whole bunch of other shows. So we've got Gamma in the US. We've got Gen Con. And loads more, absolutely loads of shows, and that's not even counting, as I say, all the Trailblazer activity. And once the Warhost program is up and running, there'll also be lots of in-store support and loads more.
Okay, so our next question is from David Rolton. A couple of questions regarding the miniatures. Will they be made of plastic, resin, metal, or some combination of all three?
Some mystical combination of plastic,
some
metal,
horrible
resin.
spiky amalgam of all three of the things, which is heavy but also light and all sorts.
So Warcradle, within our studio, we think it's really important to be able to, for quality control, to make sure that we are producing the best possible versions of the miniatures that we can. When you use third parties, that's not always, we're very careful to make sure that we've got good partnerships, but even so, really the quality that you might have worked on in-house, you haven't got necessarily that degree of influence when it's being dealt with by somebody else. So we absolutely want to make sure that our miniatures that we produce are in the best materials possible for getting them into your hands. We produce models in plastic and we also produce models in resin. I know that some of the old Spartan miniatures were in metal. We don't make miniatures in metal at present. It's something we're looking at, but I'll be honest, we're still very much in the early days of going through the moulds and checking to see where we are in developing things. What we want to make sure though is that when a customer gets a product and it's a Warcradle miniature, that it's the best possible version of that miniature we can make. And so whatever material that's made of, it's the level of quality that's the most important thing for us.
Yeah, and it comes down to suitability of design. There are things that you can do in resin and plastic which aren't possible in metal or not feasible in metal. So that has an impact on what we use as well.
Yeah, I mean, certainly some of the miniatures, particularly, and actually this takes us into Michael Foktic. I apologise, Michael, if I've just murdered your surname. He's just posted on there though. Modular models, like Spartan did their last batch of models, are you in favour of this approach or not? Well, this ties into what we've just been talking about. So it's possible that we might use plastic and then have resin add-ons, or it might be a resin hull with modular other resin add-ons. We really are at a very early stage of seeing how that all comes together. The modular approach makes a lot of sense, but what we'd like to avoid is something where the ships start to look like they're just bolted together from random modules and things.
There's just one or two ship designs with just bits sticking out of them that are slightly different.
Yeah, but then the flip side of that is trying to avoid having an entire class and then having another class that is identical except they've got a different gun. And that a more modular approach where you have a common hull and then some different add-ons and things makes more sense. But as I said, it's relatively early days for that. We should have some more news on that next year.
Jadar, I hope I've said that correctly. Will Warcradle be at Adepticon with prototype models for Dystopian Age? Well, we will be at Adepticon, and we have models. We hope, yes.
Well, assuming we are at Adepticon,
we have some models here,
yeah.
So we could just take these ones.
but what we want to do is, wherever we go, at any of the shows that we attend, we want to make sure that we have not only some product and things for people to look at, some great demo tables and all the other things that people have come to expect from our stands, but also some cool stuff that isn't out yet. So for Dystopian Wars, Armoured Clash, and anything else that we're working on, we would hope to have a few surprises from the studio wherever the Warcradle stand is.
Geeko 170, will the Japanese still be a major power or will they be rolled into the Chinese? Now, this has been asked quite a bit with regards to our last announcement, but I think there's a bit of a misconception with what we plan for the Celestials. So yes, we do have a faction which is many of the Eastern powers under one umbrella, and they are ruled by the immortal Jade Emperors, but they are still individual nations with their own identity, their own aesthetics for their ships. Yep. Even though they're allies fighting the aggressive intentions of the other world powers, they still squabble amongst themselves. So if you were to play a battle with a Chinese fleet against a Japanese fleet, it would be very clear which ships belong to which side.
Yes. The idea being, so there are 7 different, so there's 7 emperors who rule the immortal celestial empire. By the way, when we say immortal, some people might be thinking, oh, they're actually vampires or whatever.
There's no magic in Dystopian Age.
No, they're immortal. Think of it more like a dynasty, and it's a little bit twisted though, and we'll reveal exactly why or how the emperors have cultivated this reputation for being immortal. But we'll talk about that when we look at that faction in more detail in the new year. But each one of them is from a different nation. So you might have, so you have Japan, you have China, you would have Korea, and so on. So there are seven emperors for seven, and empresses, depending on which is the leader. So each one of them has their own aesthetics, their own culture, their own heritage. But working together, they've been this. I wouldn't necessarily say completely harmonious. I mean, they're like squabbling brothers and sisters, but the emperors have maintained a fairly tight hold and a harmonious union in terms of trade, commerce, economics, should I say, and also defence for over 1,000 years. So this isn't a new alliance that's come about. For over 1,000 years, the immortal Celestial Empire has been holding its own in that particular part of the world. It's only been in more recent times, particularly, and we'll cover this in the narrative, not just for the immortal Celestial Empire, but also for the Crown and the Russian Commonwealth. It's only when the Crown and the Commonwealth started to go into places that they had not been before and decided to annex parts of Korea that it then made the emperors, the seven emperors, look at the world slightly differently and think, rather than us being united and just holding into our own corner of the world, actually it might be easier if we dominate the rest of the globe to ensure that our own way of life is protected and secured. So the empire is probably the most educated, most well developed. They're also interesting in terms of their technology, because unlike the Covenant of the Enlightened, who we'll talk about in a moment, who have been doing all sorts of weird and wonderful trading, and there's been a proliferation of technology, either willingly or unwillingly, if it's been stolen from the Covenant around the world, except for the Empire, which has had no dealings, or it certainly hasn't accepted any dealings from the other nations of the world. Their inventions have been their own, and they've certainly officially anyway, and they've developed their own technology. So they have some interesting ways that you'll see as we go into their background more next year, and also as in the game itself. They have some interesting ways of doing things that some of the other nations have common ways of doing, because they come from a common base of technology, whereas the Empire has their own way of doing things. It's done them well for centuries.
Yeah, so we showed off a Chinese battleship when we made the announcement, and some people commented on there was a Japanese design on the prow. Now that was because the Emperor, who's been given control of the naval forces and controls them when the Celestials go to war against the other powers, is the Empress Shinzua.
Yes.
And that was her sigil on the ship. However, we've changed that already, because that was a work in progress. It's not necessarily her symbol on there anymore.
It does have, okay, so to clarify, so she has been in the background to it. She has been given overall command. The Japanese are of all of the nations that make up the Empire, the Japanese are the most confident, experienced with naval battle, naval warfare. So the Empress of Japan is taken the lead. She is the blazing sun. She's taken the lead in terms of commanding the naval forces. So even though there are different nations and different aesthetics and things that make up the different fleets, they do have her personal sigil, her personal banner symbol, which is the blazing sun. They do bear that on their ships. That said, though, and this is one of the things, so the ship that we launched with, that was more, and it's the same for the others as well, that's been more of a proof of concept. That was the initial ship that the studio were working on to kind of explore some of the design themes and really start to hone the style. There's been more evolution on that pattern now. So the Ninjing class very much has more of a Chinese aesthetic to it. We've been listening to some of the feedback as well, and there's been some particular areas that we felt were fairly Chinese in design, but we've kind of explored down that theme even more to make it really clear, and to make sure that even though it is still the symbol of the blazing sun on the prow, but the blazing sun is a person in the dystopian age. It isn't necessarily the empire. It's her household, for want of a better word, her entire domain and dynasty. the symbol is now stylized into the themes of each nation. So while the Ninjing carries the blazing sun motif, it is absolutely in a more Chinese interpretation of that symbol rather than the kind of the more straight lines that you would have seen on a Japanese vessel. But I think certainly when we show off the Ninjing in its final form,
which is already quite different from what we showed.
It's more of a refinement,
yeah.
But I agree. But also when you see the Japanese ships, the Korean, and so on,
they'll be instantly recognisable.
Yeah, and fantastic.
They do look really good.
One of the things we are looking to do, though, is within each faction, working on the basis that within each faction, each of these giant empires or nations, that they're sharing technology within their nation. That there will be a common sharing of certain types of technology. So, for example, all of the empire, certain turrets, so gun turrets, rocket turrets, and then the various exotic weapons. Those types of turrets are consistent throughout the factions. We're refining the design as well, so it's not just going to look like a Japanese turret bolted onto a Chinese ship. That would be weird. But there will be a certain aesthetic which will carry across all of them, and that will be the linking feature. Will be some of the technologies will link between the different nations within a faction. Whereas when you have something like the Prussians, for example, who again have their own particular aesthetics. So when we talk about the Prussian Imperium, we're talking about Prussia, but we're also talking about Scandinavia, we're talking about Austria. There are other nations. It isn't just Prussia that forms part of the Imperium. The Imperium covers multiple nations in the same way that the Celestials do, that the Crown do, and so on. So there will be a commonality of some technological features that are consistent on all of those ships. But again, the physical designs of the ships will be very specific to each nation, and hopefully should make a very interesting and attractive combined force if you play them as a combined force. But will also have enough of an identity and theme if you just want to play as one of the specific nations within your faction. You're going to have that flexibility in the game.
So we've had a new question. Is that Kai Vogley? Are we going to see massive flying Russian drill ships? I was telling you about this earlier.
I love flying drills of all nationalities. I think they're fantastic. But yes, there was that large Russian, I think it's actually a medium Russian drill ship. Of course, we want to have flying drill things in the game. That feels very dystopian. We will want to make sure the Russians have a thing for drilling, not just in terms of how they're going to be an armoured clash, but also as and when we can tie that aesthetic into Dystopian Wars. Of course we're going to do that. It's a little bit difficult. Drilling in water is not quite so
but it does fly.
Yes.
This design does particularly fly, like a certain B-movie submarine drill thing that you're already aware of.
I may have a model kit in my office. Yeah, absolutely. So flying drill stuff, cool. Why not? Let's have more of that.
Lee Zeh and Ivan. What happened to the Empire of the Blazing Sun of this universe, or at least the fictional equivalent of Japan? I think we've just answered that, haven't we?
Just answered that one, yeah.
So David Walton, regarding the storyline, will characters from Dystopian Wars lore be appearing in the setting, and will Sturginium still be the miraculous unobtainium of the setting? Well, Sturginium is not necessarily going to be the miracle cure for every type of engineering problem as it was previously.
I think it's one, right, okay. So Sturginium is absolutely a really crucial part of the dystopian setting, yeah. However, it is not the only. I think the problem is it becomes it's a bit like the atomic age. Okay, so the nuclear power is a defining characteristic of the atomic era, but not everything was atomic. And I think there is a danger if you make Sturginium the panacea, the cure for everything. That in some ways actually limits it, and there's a danger for us that it becomes a case of lazy storytelling for us, in that if we can't come up with a reason as to why something is the way it is, Sturginium did it kind of thing, which I think makes it quite difficult.
But Sturginium is still going to be a major part of the dystopian age.
Massive. In fact, it is probably one of the most important parts of the dystopian dystopian age. We've got things like the so you have Stygianium, so element 270, which was discovered in the vault by
Lord Sturgeon.
Lord Sturgeon, indeed. That's absolutely part of the background for the dystopian age. That's still a really key part of it. But then going further and taking, sort of going beyond that, you've then got other things. So Carpathian with his RJ1027, and Tesla with the Tesla coils and
galvanic energy.
And galvanic energy. There's lots of wondrous technological creations that have shaped the world.
Yeah. But they complement each other rather than overlapping in their use.
Yes. So Stygianium is a superconductor. Because it's the properties of element 270, it enables and enhances many of the other technologies, which is why Stygianium is so important in the world. But it isn't the only thing that makes the dystopian age the way it is.
Next question.
We actually characters. We should touch on
characters.
So we did touch on so Lord Sturgeon is in there. Lord Sturgeon is,
as we remember him.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's just gone a slightly different way than the way he had before. He's got new friends.
Yes.
And new alliances that he's made. But the gist of the optimistic and open society that he wishes to create is still his goal.
Yes.
It's just that his enlightened compatriots around the world have a different philosophy and a different way of doing things.
It's probably worth us talking about the enlightened, we have had several questions on
the Covenant of Antarctica.
Yeah,
where
so
it fits now.
Lee Szyn Ivan has talked about is that concept of the new equivalent of the Covenant. Have they started dabbling in biotech? So let's talk a little bit about the Covenant of the Enlightened. So the way they are a covenant, a collection of absolutely brilliant human minds from across the world.
Mathematicians, philosophers, engineers, scientists.
Yeah, they're not just scientists, but they are every aspect of humanity where somebody is a prodigy or has some kind of genius that they're applying to improve humanity. That's the common thread that runs through all of the Enlightened. However, and this is the key bit, how or what shape that enlightenment, what shape that enhancement takes, varies. There are different disciplines within the Enlightened, and each one tends to not only centres around a place on the earth or a particular concept or technology, but it also tends to focus around a particularly charismatic individual. So the Carpathian and the Carpathian discipline, or the followers of the Carpathian discipline, their centre point, their focus is in Payson, which is in the American frontier. They're focused more on, they believe that the betterment of humanity is more the enlightenment of humanity, the improvement of humanity. Their viewpoint, they see all the threats to humanity, from the alien in all its various guises, from the greed of other humans, from the theft or the unrestrained use of their technology being taken and then twisted by people who are too ignorant to know how it should be used properly. There are lots of threats to humanity, and the enlightened in Payson, so within that discipline, they believe that the best way to do that is to take all those different types of those different weapons of the enemy, for want of a better word, and twist them and turn them to the good of humanity. Unfortunately, what that means is that whether humanity wishes it or not, it will be brought into a new age. So our participation, there's almost a sense from Carpathian and his followers that what they're doing is for the betterment of humanity. The rest of humanity are like ignorant children. They'll do what they need to do in order to save us. And if we don't like it, then kicking and screaming, they'll make sure that we join them in their new bright future, with them naturally at the top as leaders. On the other hand, you have a group such as Sturgeon's discipline for the enlightened. Now Sturgeon has a slightly different view. Again, it's about the betterment of humanity and taking humanity to that future. And Sturgeon is also aware of these great threats to humanity from various angles. He, though, believes that the hope for humanity lies in technological innovation based on what they discover in the vault. The vault is a mysterious underground facility chasm deep beneath beneath Antarctica that those that follow Sturgeon are exploring and trying to glean new secrets and new surprises. That's Stygianium came from the vault and so on. They don't have control of the vault. The vault is an exceptionally dangerous and treacherous place to try and get to. However, they are, of all of the enlightened, they are the ones closest to it, and they are the ones that capitalise on any kind of inventions they get from there. Their view on things is different, though. They are much more about they keep their secrets much more closely to their chest, developing things within their own ranks. Unfortunately for them, the vast majority of their inventions have been stolen away by
the traitor Markov.
Yes, particularly treacherous individuals who were members of the Enlightened, but have, for the love of money or for other reasons, have left and taken with them some of their valuable secrets. So, even though Carpathian has tried to trade on his technology and tried to disseminate it through the world, while Sturgeon has tried to keep hold of their technology and kind of more carefully guard it and get themselves to a particular point where then they can naturally lead humanity into their future. But both of them have suffered missteps, and both of them have suffered betrayals, which has meant that much of that technology is now out there in the world. And really, that is what has heralded the dystopian age.
Yeah, and you'll find practitioners of specific disciplines in each conclave. So you may have a few Carpathian discipline people within the Sturgeon conclave, but then you may also have some Newtonian discipline people or some Darwin discipline people scattered around doing their own thing.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't have to be alive to have a discipline named after you. But we'll go into much more detail on this, as I say, in the future. But just so that you're aware, absolutely, there is a distinction within the Enlightened for these different groups, and not just Sturgeon, but other characters from the dystopian age will be cropping up, and you will. And so Napoleon is in there, Queen Victoria is in there. There are other characters who have appeared, and we will see more of them.
Blaze Baginski, is this being recorded and will it be available somewhere? Yes, it is being recorded, and you will be able to re-watch it or watch it for the first time if you're not here, and this is a rerun at some point next week.
Yeah, so if this is in 3 weeks from when this is being recorded, hello.
We're from your past.
Yes, next.
Where are we? Alex Gromoff. What will happen with Lord Sturgeon? Well, he's fine. He's as we've explained, he's doing okay, and we'll go into more detail at a later date.
So Stephen Hallowich says, I hope you can see a way to bring the Austrian Habsburgs back into the Prussian Imperium.
Entirely possible.
So do I. I think there is the great thing about having these larger banner factions is that we actually get more opportunity to look at these thematic groupings within there, and not have to then worry about we now need to make sure that not only have we brought out these few ships and bits and pieces, but now we have to come up with a sky fortress, we have to come up with this, now we can actually explore some of this thematic stuff, and it might be that there's only it's only a handful of ships, it's only like a little detail, or it might be a single large airship and some supplemental stuff. We can explore that, and that is all it needs to be. It doesn't ever have to have the obligation that it's then going to become this massive faction in its own right. It can exist within that, and so when you're playing smaller games, you can just take that particular theme or that particular grouping. But then, if you do play a larger game, you can then combine it with other forces and still be part of the same faction.
Shall we do one more Dystopian Age question and move on to more specific Dystopian Wars questions?
Yes, okay.
So Bradley Morris asks, will they be available either on webpage or purchase, more on the background of the Dystopian Age and how it relates to the world and how the new factions came to be? Absolutely yes. There'll obviously be a section in the rulebook which details that. Also, what we did for Wild West Exodus, as it was being developed and leading up to release and beyond, was we were doing blog posts talking about how the world works. We were releasing short stories and various prose, just fleshing out some of the characters in the world, and we fully intend to keep doing that with Wild West Exodus, and to do that also with Dystopian Wars and Armoured Clash.
It's actually, that is interesting. That does bring up a point. So one of the more noticeable narrative shifts is going to be, so Dystopian Wars and the Dystopian Age as a canvas is a huge global, in fact beyond the Earth, setting. And it's very easy to just start talking about these big power blocks as though they are characters in their own right, and kind of forget that there are hundreds of thousands of people that make up each of those organisations. One of the things that we will be doing is looking at, so rather than ignoring the huge power blocks and just focusing on the little people, or conversely, only focusing on the large kind of pan-global stuff and forgetting that there are individuals that have to live in that world, is actually trying to do it more that the factions and things, it's important to explain who they are and what their motivations are, but really, and more relatably, it's then down to commanders and commodores and majors and emperors and presidents and generals, and there are individual characters who make up and who serve within those forces, and it's their stories and following those characters. And you learn more about the factions, the nations, and the things involved, but you're seeing it through the eyes of actual relatable human beings and things, rather than it being quite a dry kind of historical, and then this happened, and then there was a treaty of this. That stuff is part of the world and is important, but the human aspect of things is also really important, because
the people are people rather than a statistic.
Yes.
So rather than being, this many thousand people were killed at this battle, we're actually going to we're going to be in the battle, we're going to be from the point of view of one of the people fighting the battle, and also the generals who are commanding the armies, the politicians who have caused this thing to happen, and the people who have been displaced because war has come up to their doorstep.
The statistics, the casualties and the overall ebb and flow of the battles and what have you is really important, and that is going to be, because we've got varying scales of game now, you're going to be able to play through some of those things, and that's fantastic. That's what we had hoped would be the case. But actually, in terms of the narrative, in terms of short stories and anything else that we want to do, getting into some characters, and particularly if we then move into the Armoured Clash and then into the skirmish level of things, the individual actions and things is really important. In the grand scheme of things, the heroism of an individual probably can't change the tide of an entire war. That's as romantic as the notion is, that probably isn't the case, but they might be able to save the town, or they might be able to hold the bridge, or whatever else. And I think those are fantastic stories. They're certainly that's what I like out of it, and I would hope that that's what we're going to be able to explore in the Dystopian Age.
So at Dystopian Wars, we're going to start with a really controversial question, which has come from Phil Dalbeck. Any plans to introduce bases for the dystopian naval forces? Turning and establishing fire arcs always massively annoyed me due to the non-square edges. I think this is one of those topics where you have a lot of people on either side that say, I think that's a bad idea, I think that's a good idea. And where are we on that at the moment?
We are in a position where we're still working on the rules, we're still looking at things, we're not even at the point of alpha testing yet for the rule book. It's very, very early stages. What we wouldn't do is we wouldn't roll out if basing was something that we look to do going forward, we wouldn't be saying to people you must stick your models on a base or you cannot play your games and things. We would come up with a way that it enabled you to play the game without having to rebase all of your miniatures. We're looking at it still. We're really not at a stage where we can say one way or the other. It absolutely isn't our intention, though. If we had decided we're definitely doing them on bases, we would say that. We're not at that stage. We haven't. There are good reasons to and not to, and we're still working through that. And I'll be honest, it's going to be down to playing the game and seeing how the game plays. And if the game is a better game for having bases, then that's something that we would look at. If actually they don't really add anything to the game, then we probably won't add them. I say watch this space. As soon as we know, or we have a good feel one way or the other, we will let you know, I promise.
Blaze Baginski again. Can you please unveil more about combined arms warfare in Dystopian Wars? Do you plan to keep the rules for land-based battles in Dystopian Wars, or will they only be in Armoured Clash?
Right. So combined arms. So yes, we love combined arms stuff. So air support to land, naval support with air units, naval units then making sort of beach landings, fortifications, fighting off. So there are areas where the different parts of the world can come into contact with each other. I also like the idea of like a transport or something. You can't see this is this is a very small grey blob in my hand, but so we've got a Russian Imperial transport there. So that in Armoured Clash that makes its way into a particular part of the battlefield, maybe a complex or something, and then you move to a game, a skirmish game where you're then playing through with the forces that have come out of that armoured vehicle, and you're now working your way through the corridors of the complex and things. I love all of that kind of stuff. I think that's great. And one of the great things about the Dystopian Age is that we can have these different theatres and different scales, and we can move the game as the story progresses, which really lends itself to narrative, to objective taking, and to reenacting some of the famous battles that we'll lay out. When we talk though about combined arms, so will you have aircraft that can launch ground vehicles or drop troops off and things? Yes, absolutely. Will there be naval ships that have got, say, like landing craft and things? Absolutely. But it will only, that level of combined arms will only be within the framework of the game. So that as Dystopian Wars is a game about naval engagements, and it can be air units clashing with each other as well, but it's primarily a game of naval warfare. Though beach landings and attacking fortifications and strongholds is part of that game, absolutely is part of that game. It isn't the main focus of the game. It would be like saying that so raiding banks and things is part of Wild West Exodus, but it isn't the game of raiding banks. It's a type of story that you can tell in it. And so with Dystopian Wars, there will be rules for in scale landing craft, and then either tokens or something like that the landing craft will then disgorge onto the beach in order to take key points. Again, I'm being slightly vague on that because we're still working our way through it, but that is our intention. Is we definitely want to have those kind of games being able to be played because they're loads of fun. But what we won't then do is you then take all those tiny tokens and tiny tanks and then you start moving them across, and then you're playing a whole land battle with just that kind of stuff, because really we believe that Armoured Clash is going to be the best way to show that. And going to Armoured Clash, you can fight your Armoured Clash and you can almost like do a withdrawal to the beach where you're waiting for extraction, and we'll have various bits and pieces and either scenic bits or what have you, so that you are getting to the beach in order to be extracted. But then the naval crossing and being harassed by the convoys and all the other bits and pieces, that would be something that we would cover in Dystopian Wars. That wouldn't be something we would then take and continue in Armoured Clash. So each game will focus combined arms within the sphere of the story it's trying to tell, and it will do it, I think, brilliantly at that level, and then it will very naturally hand over to the next game so it can tell the next part of the story.
We've got a live question. With the comment earlier of the Dystopian Age being global and beyond, does this mean that an extraterrestrial faction may make an appearance? Well, the Dystopian Age already has an extraterrestrial faction in the shape of the Watchers for Wild West Exodus, but they're not really a global threat.
Right. So so there are multiple other powers in the Dystopian Age. Most of them, though, are not global threats. There is a secret organisation that is politically pulling the strings in Europe, but other than that, so we don't have flying saucers. As cool as the Invaders tripods and stuff are, there is not a big alien faction stomping around Belarus or something like that. There's a really good narrative reason. I say it's not really good, but I think it's a good reason. I genuinely believe that if there was an alien threat that was on the equivalent of one of the other nations of the world in terms of very visibly with flying saucers and all the other paraphernalia or massive tripod war machines, that the human nations would band together, and it would actually unify so many of these disparate factions against the invader. It might be that once the invaders were defeated, humanity then falls back on itself again. That's entirely possible. But the dystopian age isn't in a place where there is that great unifying force there. The tragedy of the age is that you've got these different empires, and through greed and ambition and politics and misunderstandings and mistrust, they're at times at each other's throats. They're making very temporary alliances and so on. So the shifting politics of the dystopian age is something that we want to explore in more detail, and having an alien threat at that kind of level would make those kind of nation building and the clash type of thing quite difficult. That said, there is absolutely not just from the whatever is in the vault, but there is absolutely the influence of the other in the world. So there are various factions already in Wild West Exodus that we can see the touch of an outside influence. But it's really important that, yes, there are alien influences, but they aren't controlling humanity. There are no factions that are controlling humanity. Humanity is absolutely in the driving seat of it. It may be that they are, so the warrior nation, for example, are following what they believe is the Great Spirit, but they have their own beliefs and things. They aren't slavishly kind of following blindly the doctrines of it. And similarly, the Hex. There's an entity in the world called the Hex that has a kind of an influence. But it's a benign influence on its allies. But the allies are humans, and they're drawing power from the Hex. It's not really a supernatural power, but they're drawing a kind of a bioenergy from the Hex, which enables them to do things that seem fantastical, but are unfortunately all too real. But again, they're not under its control. In fact, it's actually the other way around. They're the kind of the selfishness and the greed and the corruption of humans has influenced the Hex, not the other way around. And again, that's something that we can explore when we get down to the individual character level, rather than just looking at these large blank states and just saying, oh yes, well this is what's happening over here. Getting into the kind of the more interpersonal level means that we can explore that and really keep humanity at the in the driving seat, at the centre of things.
So I think this is also from Blaze Baginski. Do you plan to rewrite Shuffle the rulebook? Truth is, it's hard to read, hard to get into, and the game could be shorter. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely don't want to have two A4 Age of Sigmar sheets of rules, which we can all understand why. But take a look at New 40k Kings of War, Wolfsnot, X-Wing. They all have a few team pages of rules and provide more fun than ridiculous 200 pages of Dystopian Wars. I think this also touches on something you've commented on before, where people were asking about fleet action.
Yeah. Okay. So, I
mean, from my standpoint, although I've played Dystopian Wars for a few years and I like Dystopian Wars, but I have found that the rule book's very hard to understand, and more often than not, I've had to ask other people to show me, as much as I've read the rule book, how to actually play the game. It does seem that there's a lot of exceptions before you get the basics down.
Yeah, I mean, every rule book, every publisher, every studio has their own way of doing things, and will have their own fans of the way particular things are done, and then there are detractors. I would agree. I find it. I like to have a rule book where you can immediately start picking up models and start moving them around. Not like that. That's not how boats work, or ships, should I say? But you move your miniatures around, and you can play through the rules as you're reading them. So I think that the rules should follow a sequence of play within a few pages of each other.
You should be able to get the basics of a game down. You should be able to understand the core mechanics of a game before you then start adding on the additional rules and extra layers of gameplay. So you should be able to be fairly well versed in how the game actually works before you start getting into the nitty-gritty.
It's not a proper war game though if you haven't played a game through with your mate and then
shouldn't have done that.
Lost brutally and then go, oh well, I would have won if I'd done this very simple rule that I missed within the first read through. But yeah, so less less of a book, as in streamlining that, but it can be a nice, big, thick, chunky book.
Oh, yeah.
Just have more background, have more
art,
painting guides,
painted miniature photographs,
all that kind of stuff. A good index, a good contents page.
But as far as scaling for different size of games, so rather than having multiple types of rules so you can play different size games, our goal will be that the rules that we give you are flexible enough that you can play a small game within a short period of time, but that can then scale up to massive fleet actions that have various squadrons on the board and can take several hours.
Yeah, I think I love Dystopian Wars, I have done for years. My only slight criticism would have been that if I wanted to play a fun game with my French, I would have had to put 3 hours aside or maybe more.
I mean, I don't think I ever finished a decent sized game in our gaming centre when I played after work for 3 or 4 hours. We were only probably up to turn 3, and we had to stop there, shake hands and say, oh well, maybe next time.
Well, and there's one of the things that we want to make sure is the case. So right, one of the things that I am not so keen on personally is that each faction is basically an aesthetics choice rather than a thematic and tactical choice as well. The different nations in the Dystopian Age, depending on whatever theatre they're in, so if they're in Armoured Clash or if they're in Dystopian Wars or Warcradle Exodus or whatever, they should play differently to each other. Yeah, so you're not just making a choice because of what models you like the look of, although that's a really good reason to choose to play a particular faction, but it's also, I like them because they're very good at X, they're very good at closing range. I like the idea of bringing my my battleships up and then unleashing a lot of napalm or something and melting off the front of, that's their play style, or they prefer gas weapons or Tesla weapons or heat lances or whatever it is. So, but because of that, one of the ways that you can have different factions playing is that there are some factions that may be a little slower to start in the early part of the game, but then they really come into their own in the late, the final few turns of the game. If the game length is so long, though, that those final few turns, sometimes you never get them in, then the long, slow play style of the game would mean that certain factions are going to be hugely advantaged, and the game boils down to becoming an alpha strike, and it becomes, Warhammer 40,000 was like that at one point, where it was just about what you could annihilate in turn one, and then,
I believe we played a game of War Machine that was pretty much the same thing.
Yes.
Yeah,
so we want to avoid that, and the way to do that is to make sure that you can get in a decent sized game, whatever that looks like, within a couple of hours, and I think that's fair because that then represents what I think is the majority of the way people play. Yes, I'm sure people play in their lunch break, and so by all means have the ability to play smaller games with the rule set, of course. And some people want to put an afternoon or a day aside for a massive battle. Cool, the game should scale, just as Lee was saying. But the most common way to play should be around about 2 hours, and it should be with a fairly, what you would be comfortable, a figure case worth of ships. So I would imagine maybe a dozen to 2 dozen ships per side, and some cool big stuff and some fun stuff, and maybe a robot, maybe some flying things, and some good fun stuff, but not necessarily having to put aside, as I say, this masses of time, because who has that sometimes?
Yeah, it becomes an event that maybe you get to play a game of Dystopian Wars once a month or once every couple of months.
Yeah.
And where's the fun in that? If you're spending all your time putting together your models and paint them, and you get to use them once in a blue moon, or you can't even introduce new people to it because you have to convince them to put aside an afternoon and meet at a certain point in time to get the game played.
Yeah, can I show you to play Armoured Clash? Have you got yourself 50 minutes, and I'll run you through. I'll run you through a brief
introduction.
Yeah. So it is something we're really keen to make sure it's as easy for people to get into as possible, and the game flows. That said, and you mentioned Age of Sigmar, or what would be a good one to avoid? Age of Stygianium.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Age of Sturgis. What we want to make sure is that we aren't. In order to get there, it's about having a very easy, intuitive to follow rulebook, but not strip out all of the granular, interesting stuff from the game. So again, you get that thing where all the factions are essentially just the same. They just look a little bit different. That it has to have the detail,
And the game mechanics have to be Dystopian Wars game mechanics. You can't just make them a cookie-cutter version of a different game because it's popular and you think people, if people play that, they'll play this. Can
you imagine if we did Wild West Exodus? If we took Wild West Exodus's game engine, so it's a D10, you tend to, when you're doing anything, you're rolling one D10, and we're just going to make Dystopian Wars use that.
Yeah, well, that's not going to get any games finished in an afternoon. No, never mind an hour.
No, so that's not what's happening. It will be the best version of the game and the rules that we can do to play, so it feels like Armoured Clash, so a massive land engagement, or it feels like a fantastic sea battle. So the rules are going to be that way, but they should be able to move on a pace as well.
Now, I want to start picking up some models, although people won't be able to see them very well.
They're just going to be little grey blobs.
Well, let's move on to Armoured Clash, because there are a lot of questions about Armoured Clash, and in particular it allows us to use visual aids. So we'll answer the question of scale first of all, because that's been on a lot of people's mind. So we've got here, you won't be able to see the detail, but this is a Minsk.
It is, it's a Minsk tank destroyer.
So this is the Spartan Games Minsk. Before we came here to film this, we were looking at our newly redesigned Minsk.
And it's exactly the same.
Yes.
Other than it's got more detail.
Yeah, update details. It's pretty much the same. If you had it on the table, it would look pretty much the same to you. You wouldn't be able to tell.
I think you're probably pointing at something they can't see.
Yeah, well, that's the point. When you're looking at it at the table, you can't see all the intricate detail. I mean, on here, there is some very tiny hatches and a couple of really small ladders. But on our new Minsk, there's a door on the back which is scaled to 10mm. Other than that, it is pretty much the same, but better than this model.
Yes, and it's the same. The miniature is about the same size as well. So when in some of the comments I'd mentioned about how you can use your existing land miniatures in Armoured Clash and don't worry about the scale. I'm not saying that you're going to look at it and go, oh, that's absolutely a 10mm tank. Of course it's not. Yeah, I mean, unless it's what is this? A tank for ants? You know, unless it's. But the details on them. I mean, bearing in mind the Minsk must be about the size of a warehouse in.
Whereas in the new Armoured Clash, it will be the size of a large tank.
Yes, it will be the size of a tank hunter, of a tank destroyer, kind of a not quite a modern one, but certainly one from probably the Second World War. That kind of.
But the miniature will
size,
be
like a Stug.
Yeah, the new miniature will be the same size as the old miniature, so it will make no difference to your collection if you've already got a ton of Minsk and you don't really want any more. You can use your old Minsk and play the game without any real discernible difference.
You want the new one though, because it will be really cool.
Because it does look awesome.
But if you have some of the old ones, you absolutely can use them in there, and you'll know. And for some people, I accept that might be that might crush you. I would know. I would want to slowly phase out the old ones. But I mean, another way of doing it, and bearing in mind your opponent is only ever going to see them as small little things on your side of the table anyway. So that's a Rolling Thunder,
which we showed in our announcement video.
That's the Minsk. They're about the same size. So there's not going to be we're not talking like a massive distortion. And again, so when people are saying, oh, but we're not going to get any land ships, you absolutely are going to get land ships.
They're just scaled differently. So rather than being the size of a town, they'll be the size of a football pitch.
Yeah, there's still going to be vast tanks on vast like Leviathan-like stadiums on tracks kind of thing, but they are slightly less. One of the things I like about having these massive vehicles and things is that if everything's absolutely colossal, then it kind of loses a little bit of the impact. One of the great things and why we're going to 10mm for Armoured Clash is you can get people. And
I mean, this is a model that exists in Wild West Exodus in 35mm scale.
That's actually better than the Wild West Exodus one. That's got more detail. That's been up-detailed, and at some point, I guess we're going to have to get round to adding to Wild West Exodus one. Yeah.
So your Minsk, whether it's new or old, you'll be able to use that in any potential 35mm games we use out in the wider world, potentially.
Yeah, at some point we could bring the Minsk out in that scale, 35mm scale, and it's probably going to be about that. So it's maybe about that. I'm not very good at judging those kind of sizes.
It's absolutely pointless on the video. Just
see me doing this.
So wave your hands until you get the right
smaller than my giant egg-like head. But yes, so bottom line is we're going to make sure, as honestly, as hard as we can, we're going to make sure that you can use your old models if you have some.
I mean, there are some obvious exceptions. Like if people have a mobile airfield, which has teeny tiny little planes on it now, people are assuming that that's not going to be useful.
Right. So one of the questions has been about the tiny flyers. In fact, Simon, I think we had a question about tiny flyers. I'll give the correct. Here we go. Chris Carter said, "Since mobile carriers have gone, will SAS still be represented in Armoured Clash?" So the little squadrons, little air tokens. So there won't be tiny flyer tokens as such in Armoured Clash, because the scale of the game means that actually an aeroplane, a fighter, would probably be about an inch or so long. So those tiny aircraft that you would have as a token in Dystopian Wars, you absolutely will be getting miniatures of them flying around.
But rather than being very nicely detailed, teeny tiny little things, they'll actually be properly scaled to the tanks and the people.
So you have the proper aircraft doing it. But there will still be a mechanism for having things like mobile airfields. I love the mobile airfields.
I like the walking Japanese ones.
Yeah, the mobile airfields are great, and they'll be in Armoured Clash. But rather than launching full-size aircraft, because really we will have some that could launch a full-size aircraft, but really it's going to be more about smaller things. But there's lots of things that can be that can zip through the air and come at you that aren't necessarily jet fighters or turboprops or whatever. So we've got things like jetpack troops. We've got things like gyrocopters. I mean, there's a gyrocopter in Wild West Exodus that's essentially, it's a pod. It's like an egg-like thing with a little screw above it. There's no reason why the Union wouldn't have something like that, a military version of that for observation and scouting around. So having vehicles that can launch those, having vehicles that can launch either winged or jet troops or what have you.
And they'd have to be eccentric. They'd have to be out of their minds to be flying around with all these massive vehicles and flak everywhere. You have to be a little bit crazy. So I imagine there's quite a few of them in the Enlightened.
Well, there's been some great. So in Dystopian Legions, there was some cool British troops with the jetpacks, like the Sky Guys, and the Blazing Sun has kind of like a Tengu kind of samurai type armour with the big batwing type things. Where would they be? And they're going to be in Armoured Clash as well. And why wouldn't we have them with either a catapult or a launch platform, or
just a massive Acme catapult, just an opened Acme crate to the side, a big giant elastic band. Right, who's up next?
British guy puts his goggles down. Okay, chaps,
put the country.
Yeah, but we will have. It won't be that, but we will have something like that, something cool. So there will absolutely be the ability to project aerial assets into different places on the battlefield. So not aeroplanes, but other flying things for sure.
There was a question just a bit up the page, if I could get the name of the person, which is similar. Anthony Trudgett, with the scaling changes, will you be making any add-on or upgrade packs, e.g. gunner models to transform the tiny tanks into machine guns, or some overlay components to make the planes modelled on the airfields? So basically, we're going to release parts which would change the existing models so they look more in scale with the new models.
We'd like to. We haven't gone that far in the design process for exactly that kind of thing. But on our whiteboard of things that we would like to do, for sure, because we want to make it as easy for people. But also, if we did bring out a lot of doors and hatches and ladders and bits and pieces, for people that want to build fortifications and other things in Armoured Clash and defence walls and factories and other things, they're great add-ons, again, to really help scale those features. So that is something we would like to do. We have no firm plans to do it. We haven't put any studio time in it yet, but it's something we think would be cool. More news when we have it.
Clark Bresling asks, will Armoured Clash be a new rule set, or will the old rules be adapted to the new scale?
You know the answer to this one.
I don't want to say.
Right, yes. So
you take this one.
So new game, new rules, new scale. There is a huge amount to be gained with the game working in 10mm. We want to make sure that the rule set helps support that. Will it have familiar aspects of Dystopian Wars? Yeah, of course it will. But will it also have its own unique aspects to it? Absolutely. Will it potentially borrow things from other games, so something like Wild West Exodus, in terms of things like terrain or cover and things? Absolutely. There's lots of things that we can do, but it will be its own rule set, its own scale, its own way of playing. It'll have a particular feel to it, so it will feel like that type of game rather than a kind of an add-on to a naval game or an upscaled skirmish game. It will very much feel like its own type of game. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I'm particularly looking forward to terrain and things at that level. I think are quite cool. I'd like the idea of building up like a proper town or even a city, and sort of seeing all the various things, like the race for the centre as they're kind of portioning up the going like city block to city block and things like that. I'm really looking forward to Armoured Clash.
I mean, as far as rules go, you'll get a chance to try out the rules before the Armoured Clash goes to retail. As we did with Wild West Exodus, we will have an open beta, and this goes for Dystopian Wars as well, where our pretty semi-finished version of the game will be given to you, the public and the community, and we'll ask you to play it. And based on your feedback, we'll make any changes which we think are justified. I mean, there may be a couple of bits in there, a couple of mechanics which are set in stone and we don't really want to change.
No, we're not going to use models anymore. We're going to use wheels of cheese.
So everything around it, the balancing and how the game works, will be up to you. I mean, the version of Wild West Exodus that we released to the open beta is not the version of Wild West Exodus that has now been released.
No, it significantly evolved, and there was actually some really great stuff that came out of the beta test, which changed how combat worked. There was some stuff that changed how unit coherency worked, and some of the morale stuff worked. So I would expect, I'd be disappointed if we didn't see a similar level of ingenuity and really fantastic feedback from the community to make it a better game.
Which is why we want you to be able to use your current models, because if we give you rules for a game that we haven't released any models for, how can you playtest it?
Cardboard and paper.
Oh, no, don't
and
go there.
Stick and jelly beans and wheels of cheese.
Oh.
Yes, so so the beta will be great. But the way it becomes brilliant is by the way that you all engage with it. So, as I say, we'll have more news as to when the beta is, but you'll have to bear with us because we haven't even got the alpha yet. So, watch this space.
So, Jeff Hardisty, you stated that Armoured Clash is going to be first based in Africa. What about factions that are not really involved in Africa? Well, this is a narrative decision.
Yeah,
so
okay.
Although the narrative of Armoured Clash will predominantly take place in Africa because it has the terrain that we're looking for, Armoured Clash games could be played anywhere in the world.
Yeah, okay. That was not a misspeak on my part, but certainly I gave Africa as a really key focus point for Armoured Clash. It's a key narrative point, but there's also key narrative points all over the world. South America, there's also another key battleground. There's key battlegrounds in some of the fracture points between the major empires in Europe. On the borders with the Immortal Celestial Empire, there's going to be, like around Korea and things, there's going to be some really key flashpoints.
There'll be demilitarised zones scattered all over the world that are going to be flashpoints.
So Armoured Clash is absolutely, you have the entire, anywhere there is land mass, you have the entirety of the nations of the earth to battle against. Antarctica, I mentioned how...
Put the chains on the wheels.
So I mentioned how Sturgeon doesn't have free reign of the vault. One of the reasons being is because the other nation or the other factions of the world are very clear as to where the Enlightened are getting some of their technology from, and there's no way that they're going to allow them free reign. So there are raiding groups that go towards and try and seize parts of the vault. Nobody can hold the vault for long, but you can get like an Armoured Clash sized military force at least part of the way there.
Yeah, I mean the vault is an immense space. There's lots of different chambers which somehow have lots of different environments in them. But you could also be outside in the snow, and that would introduce hazards for weather and all other sorts of rules that will be added into your campaign and scenarios and such.
We'll talk about Antarctica another time.
Yeah, we'll go into more detail about Antarctica.
So, so Armoured Clash, there are all over the world hotspots. And the game is absolutely about being able to play those battles anywhere in the world that you and your gaming group or your friends want them to take place. There will be a narrative. There will be a campaign which will fight through Africa. There will be a campaign in South America and a few other places as well. but it's more of the world is your battleground.
Bruno Michel has given us a live question. Could we expect campaigns mixing the 3 games? I think that's a given, isn't it?
Pretty much.
He says 3 games, though. We've only really discussed 2 games.
Yeah, and on my whiteboard we've got 5. So
well, he must mean Wild West Exodus. I'm stuck in the Dystopian Age so much that I've neglected almost.
There are lot. Okay, so we have lots of games that we would like to develop in. I mean, the great thing about having this sort of sandbox Dystopian Age is that there are all sorts of things that we can explore in that world. Rather than getting carried away on what could be, we're absolutely talking about Dystopian Wars, Armoured Clash, and Wild West Exodus. But there's an awful lot of potential to explore other parts. And in terms of 35mm, 30mm, that kind of skirmish level game, Wild West Exodus is not the final word on that. It is a really important part of the world and a very tight narrative in a particular corner of the earth. But there are lots of narrative points over the earth. I mean, we could explore the outback of Australia. We could explore what's happening in Egypt right now. We could explore the streets of Berlin. There's all sorts of places where we could really focus on, and we can go broader as well, because while Wild West Exodus has a great feel for kind of like the little warband posse. What about squads and specialists and that kind of larger military formation type stuff? So there's a whole world still to play in. We're not in a place where we have anything to announce just yet, but we have irons in fires. Rest assured.
You've started something now. Brett JJ, will Dystopian Wars and Armoured Clash be released side by side, or will it be a staggered release? And then will you have themed wheels of cheese for each faction?
Yeah,
there's a promotional item if ever.
Certainly, thematic cheese wheels is something we would look at. Dystopian Wars and Armoured Clash. There's a thing as a studio. It's a case of what to focus on. Not just so we have different teams working on these games. Okay, so it's not a case of we're going to work on this and then we're going to forget this one exists as soon as it comes out, and we're going to work on this, and then we're going to forget that one exists, and then we're going to work on this, and so on. That's not. There are other companies who might have operated that way. That's not how we operate. But there is a benefit to doing that, which is that in terms of communication and as long as we're maintaining the existing games that we've released, and we've got other exciting releases coming for it, it is I think the right way to do it, where you talk to the overall community for a game, so the overall Dystopian Age community, and you say, okay, this is the new game, this is the thing to get excited about right now. Know that you play Wild West Exodus, I know that you play Dystopian Wars, so you got your naval stuff because that's already come out kind of thing, but now let's talk about Armoured Clash. We've still got releases coming out for the other games, but we're now going to talk about Armoured Clash, and then we'll move on to the next game and continue to support those other games with a regular series of releases and campaigns and narrative. And because they're part of one unified world, they all weave into each other. So we will do Dystopian Wars is, in terms of development, is likely to be the first one out. We'll make a formal announcement about that in the new year. Dystopian Wars would be first, then you'd be looking at Armoured Clash. So you will have every opportunity to get very excited about one, and then get it, play it, love it, and then we can introduce you to a whole new game, and you can get very excited about that. Or if one of them doesn't turn out to be the thing that you want to get into, that's fine too, because there'll be a whole host of still loads of releases for Wild West Exodus coming out, loads of releases for Dystopian Wars, loads of releases for Armoured Clash, and so on. So we're going to be very, very busy by the time we're getting into 2019. We're going to be very, very busy, because we'll have 3 major games with a whole host of support and releases for them. But I think that's a good problem to have. And what I like about it is, so then we talk about, will there be a campaign where we tie the 3 in? Yeah, so we need to get all of those games out there so that we can then start to blend those things together. And that's what we're aiming towards.
Todd Rumbach, any plans for an RPG? And Jadar Todd, I second the RPG, as I thought that the setting is ripe for one.
Well, rocket propelled grenades, I think, are a underplayed aspect of the game.
I'm not sure everyone can be trusted with them though.
Yeah, role-play games, love role-play games. The key bit about them is to make sure that the world is really rich and that there is this place. And that's the problem with having a setting where it's this kind of vast, just these empires, and you're just talking about these big nation states and you know nothing about the individuals. Their stories are really important, and you think of some of your favourite World War II films, or as an example, and it's usually, particularly in more recent times, but actually no, I think it's probably always been the case. That you're following particular characters, and the war is the war is the background. The war is the so Band of Brothers, Saving Private Ryan, the war, but you're following particular groups, particular units. You might not stay with them for the entire narrative. You might change between them, but it's from the point of view of the most relatable thing, which is other people, and how they are. So a role play is rich for that kind of stuff. We need to make sure that the role play has a purpose, though, because there's nothing.
We're not ticking a box, are we?
Yeah, but there's also nothing weirder than saying, "Yeah, we got the role play game of the Dystopian Age. Cool." So I want to play a celestial grenadier or something. You play
an enlightened galvanic researcher.
Yeah, and then somebody else plays a Union Pinkerton or something. You're going right, and so your GM's like. Okay.
Which continent are you on? Yeah. How did you meet?
Yeah.
Why are you even together?
I want to play a canine attack dog.
So, there you are.
Yeah. So it becomes quite difficult. So we would need to make sure that, I'll be honest, in the same way that you have these great narrative threads that you can build games around for the role play game as well. We'd make sure that there were narrative thread. I thought that. Fantasy Flight Games did that very well, or Black Industries as it was when they previously had the license, when they did their Warhammer 40,000. So rather than it just being a Warhammer 40,000 roleplay game, it was you had this
specific sector that you were in, which
then,
had its own planets,
and then you had particularly groupings so that the groups became a thing. Fantasy Flight Games have also done a good job with their Star Wars roleplay, where you have like the Age of Rebellion stuff, or thematically there's a little bit more of a starting point for a games master to kind of bring groups together. Watch this space. We're definitely something we want to do.
Shall we just answer a couple of questions about Wild West Exodus, because we've neglected our Wild West Exodus players a little bit.
Yes.
Chris Nelson, why was spirit weapons removed from the game? My holy order are now left on the shelf. Why would you leave the order on the shelf?
Nobody puts order in the corner.
No one puts Abner on the shelf.
Spirit weapons are absolutely part of the game. Where they come from is a little ambiguous in terms of. So they're projections of the mind. Mm-hmm. What the sources of that projection is down to individual belief. So the Warrior Nation believes that it's spiritual energy that they channel from the Great Spirit. There are other beings in the world who can also use their minds to project things, and they are not attuned to the Great Spirit. So there's something, in fact, I'd imagine the Enlightened have an entire school of thought based around the study of spirit energy and how that could be and what that really could.
Well, let's not get Olga Hudson started on the subject, because we'll never get out there. But as far as the Order go, we have shown off new releases for the Order, which the Core Corolli are coming. You will definitely want to get your Order off the shelf once they're released.
Well, yeah, absolutely, or they'll burn you.
Yes, they will. They're quite judgmental that way. Christopher Andrew. Hello, Christopher. How will WWX develop? I suspect, knowing you guys, it will be exciting in this extended world. Absolutely. I mean, our plans for WWX haven't changed. We had lots of plans before.
Yeah, I think they've undergone, because we knew what we wanted to do in very, very broad terms with the Dystopian Age during Wild West Exodus's shaping. Because Wild West Exodus, for those of you that don't play it, has just had a second edition come out. So while second edition was being created, in the background to Wild West Exodus changed quite a bit. That was done with a view to having this greater world. So the changes or the impact of now being part of the Dystopian Age are less for Wild West Exodus, but only because it's already had a fairly seismic shift in some of the ways it's structured. So, I mean, there are a couple of changes.
The Celestials and the Crown now have a different place in the world.
They do. So anything in the Wild West Exodus background that was talking about things beyond its borders, as it were, that's now been refocused as part of the Dystopian Age. But largely, and this is why I really like these narrative hotspots around the world, Wild West Exodus gets on with its thing in its part of the world in the same way that in the high seas and things, Dystopian Wars is going to do its thing, and they're not necessarily going to clash with each other, except in some of the designs and things. And that's what I really like about having the shared world, that you can have, there are little design callbacks and things, and some of the battleships that tie into the tanks, which tie into maybe some of the knee pad armour or something on some of the troops. And it's these little things, little details like that it really does feel like you've got part of an entire joined up world, rather than having a kind of a random collection of things that allegedly are part of the same universe, but they're not really. So in terms of how things are going with Wild West Exodus, we had a busy schedule planned for 2018. I think if anything, it's probably gotten busier. Now we've got other things in the Dystopian Age to do. We have a hardback rulebook that's in development. We've taken some extra time. Now things are being fleshed out a little bit more for the Dystopian Age. We're going to make sure that material also makes its way into that hardback rulebook. So it absolutely is a fantastic resource, not just for Wild West Exodus players, but for fans of the Dystopian Age as well, so they can see how narratively that part of the world fits into the rest of the planet. And
the studio's still supporting Wild West Exodus through videos. So we've got gameplay videos.
Yep.
We've got sneak peeks. Hopefully you saw the Deadly 7 one that we released very recently. There's plenty going on. You don't need to worry about it.
Well, we've got posses and faction sets and all sorts of releases. We've got dozens and dozens and dozens of releases. And that's just for next year. Whereas, 2019, 2020, there's loads coming, and it's for Wild West Exodus. What I'm hoping is the Dystopian Age actually is an opportunity for some people to discover Wild West Exodus for the first time, that they hadn't really or they'd heard about it, they hadn't really thought about it, hadn't really seen it, and now it's part of that joined up world. They're going to go, actually, the miniatures are lovely. I'm seeing the design cues where it's all kind of linking together. Great, let's have a go. And I'll be honest, if you found, if the Dystopian Age has meant that you found a game that you find is fun and these miniatures that bring in your pleasure, jobs are good, and I think that's a big tick in the box.
While we're off on a bit of a tangent, we have a question from Nathan H. Dayton the 5th. I'm assuming that's the 5th. What's the future look like for Firestorm at Armoured?
Yeah, let's talk about some Firestorm.
I'm really excited for what we have planned for Firestorm. I know it's not as developed at the moment as Dystopian Wars, but that's really got my
so I know this is a Dystopian Age conversation, but we will touch on Firestorm briefly. So Firestorm Armada and also Planetfall, so the Firestorm games, definitely something that we are very excited about developing. We're making some very early stages. We're talking to some people and starting to look at the shape of the world. It's quite a way off, though. We're going to be developing that throughout most of next year. I wouldn't expect, manage your expectations. I wouldn't expect to see much regarding an alpha or a beta for Firestorm until easily a year away. So the great news is that the rules, the setting and everything for Firestorm as it is at the moment is still where you're going to be able to play and not have to worry about any changes or anything like that for at least the next 12 months. We are working on things though, and as we have exciting things to show you and reveal, absolutely we'll do blog articles and videos and all the other bits and pieces. Wild West Exodus players hopefully will know me. The Dystopian guys are going to start to get to know me. I'm terrible at keeping secrets, so I leak.
Ain't that the truth?
Yeah, I leak terribly. So I'll do a video on something very random, and then I'll just suddenly bring a sketch up or something. So stuff will leak out as we're developing it. Stuff will leak out. As soon as I get something really cool to show off, I'll find it.
Where shall we go next with our questions?
So shall we go to Nathan Dayton has said same universe as the Dystopian Age. So I'm assuming, Nathan, that you mean that Firestorm is going to be the Dystopian Age in the future. I don't think it will.
No, I mean there are very established human cultures in the Firestorm Armada, and it is its own thing. Really, it's entirely separate.
Yeah, it's more that I don't like. It's like.
I mean, that does feel like it would be just trying to do it for the sake of doing it.
Well, it's not. Yeah, it's not just that. It would be like having knowing where you're going on a book. It's like opening a book, and the first chapter of the book tells you effectively who's going to survive, who's doing this, who's doing that, and then
3,000 years earlier,
and then you get to read their story. It's like, okay, so any possible drama has just vanished. So they're really going to be their own thing.
And we're not going down the time travel route.
Time travel gives me nosebleeds.
It just crosses my eyes. Temporal investigations gets involved, and yet those guys are boring.
Leave it to trained professionals with a Type 40. Right, what's next? Okay. So when can we see the current? So this touches on Firestorm, but also on Dystopian Wars. So some people have been asking about. So Gav Johnston and David Millington ask about getting the current miniatures out soon, or just a continuation. So this is also for Dystopian Wars. So there's some ships and things that were released and have obviously gone out of production now. We're looking to get all of these things back into production. We're looking at different mechanisms to be able to do it as well. We will have something to announce about that early next year, and we'll talk about how we can get those products out to people. It's something we want to do, but again, I think there was some people make comments and things, and it's as though they're the world authority on how all these things must be. Oh, you just crack the mould open and pour some resin in and pop them out, and away you go. It's like making a blancmange.
I just get to leave a puddle on the floor.
It's not quite that. It's
not that easy.
And
it's not in the industrial scale that you need to produce enough models to sell to stores, to customers online.
And it's not just the practicalities of physically, because anybody can make resin models in their garage kind of thing. If you've got a mould and you've got some resin, it's not just about that. It's about creating it in such a way that actually, realistically, people can get it as a product. So that there are other things that we need to look at in order to do that properly. And so we're looking at that, and as soon as we have something we can tell you, we will do. But yes, we want to make sure that people get a load of these miniatures.
Ryan Lang, which faction are the French part of now in the Dystopian Age? Well, that's the Latin Alliance?
Yeah, the French Republic are key members.
Key as in first among equals.
Well, yeah.
That's how they consider themselves.
Yeah.
Liberty for all, but we're more for us.
The French Republic, led by beloved Napoleon, are at the forefront of the Latin Alliance in the Dystopian Age. The prestige, or the way that the French Republic puts the rest of the alliance kind of around it, is a bone of contention for some of the other members, but again, that's something that we'll be able to explore narratively going forward. I think that's one of the best bits is, yes, you've got these factions made up of these different nations, but it's the interplay between the nations and who is in charge and who's allowed to have the impression that they're the one calling the shots and so on. Politics is
I believe in equality as long as you have less than me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said, yeah. We're quite a way over time, so we're going to have to wrap this up shortly. There's
an Uncharted Seas question. What about Uncharted Seas, asks Sherwin Matthews. Are we looking at a new edition in 2019, or are there currently no plans? There are definitely plans for the system. In fact, Stu has released, in his leaky manner, some concept art online. So if you go to the Uncharted Seas Facebook page, you should be able to find that quite easily.
Yeah, so as I said before, we have different teams working with different games. Okay, we are releasing things sequentially in a particular setting. So, for example, for Dystopian Age, because it's all part of the same universe, there's no point us releasing two games at the same time. Which one are you supposed to get excited about first? And actually, all we'll do is we'd split the potential audience. Whereas if we do them in a complementary way. Some people will be able to go from one to the other, or some people, they will have missed out the first one because they want the second one, and vice versa. With games like Uncharted Seas, that's not part of the Dystopian Age. It's not in the past of the Dystopian Age. It's not in the fantasy alternate timeline of the Dystopian Age. It's not in the futuristic Firestorm. It's its own thing.
And that goes for all our games. The Dystopian Age is its own separate thing. Firestorm Armada will be its own separate thing. Uncharted Seas will be its own separate thing. Yeah. But they will all get the Warcradle treatment. So there will be a consistent level of quality across all the ranges.
Well said. I like that. Might even have that as a strapline. But the thing that we need to have is we need to make sure that we've got the game ready in such a way that, regardless of whatever the setting is, there's so many games out there now. It's a great time to be a gamer. You've got so many, not just from Kickstarters, but there's so many different games out there that you can get involved in. But the problem with that is it's sometimes hard to know what you're supposed to get excited about, or what's going to, and if it grabs your attention, what about your friends, what about your club, and so on. So when we release a game, we need to make sure that it's as exciting and as fully formed as it can possibly be. I don't think you can get away these days with kind of releasing a little bit of a game and not really following it up with anything else for a while, because the game will just die off. People will lose interest, and usually you get one good chance with people, I think, to show them that your vision for a particular thing is the way to go.
There was a question earlier. I'm afraid I don't remember the name of the person who asked it, but they were of the opinion that Dystopian Wars, as it wasn't pushed aggressively enough to reach as many people as it possibly could have. So by concentrating on one game at a time, we can give it that attention. We can push it to its intended audience without any distractions from ourselves muddying up the message. So people know exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about Dystopian Wars. Look at this game, it's brilliant. Why don't you try it out? And there's nothing else that we're putting out there that's going to distract from the awesome Dystopian Wars products that we're going to be putting out.
So with Uncharted Seas, yes, it's in development. We will, again, next year at some point, we will announce what's happening with Uncharted Seas. It might surprise a few of you. You'll just have to watch this space, but it's I'm quite excited.
Yes,
I get excited about a lot of stuff though, so it's quite bad being so close.
We've
to
got
the
the
studio.
paddles in case he collapses.
Yeah, there's some quite cool stuff going on. Right, let's do.
Hello, Sarah. Hello.
Sarah.
Yes, we are. I'm excited by the fact that you've got a Dystopian Age short story in your head. Get writing it, and send it over.
Yeah, we do like a vignette. I do like a vignette. Okay, let's do one more. Let's do one on Armoured Clash. Have we got another Armoured Clash question?
Scrolling down.
Okay, yeah. So since aerial models are now in both settings, will it still be possible to do aerial versus aerial games, and how will forces be balanced to stop one of an army from being overpowered? Yeah, it's a really good question. That was by Chris Carter. So one of the things about the original or the previous version of Dystopian Wars is that because it had all these different theatres and it had all these different height levels and so on, so you do have a difficulty when you're trying to give an advantage, or you're trying to come up with rules to cover all of these different things that you're trying to show. And what that means is that if somebody then picks two extremes in that, so if somebody took all, I don't know, submersed units and somebody took all aerial units, that's
one side's at a greater advantage or disadvantage to another.
Well, one side can't find the other side, and the other side can't
around
shoot.
The
other side can't shoot the other one.
Yeah, so the submerged army is just waiting for the planes to run out of fuel and drop into the sea, and they will shoot them as they sink to the bottom.
They're waiting for the submerged ones to run out of air.
Yeah.
So it's a race to the bottom. So being able to work in these two other settings now, so with Armoured Clash being how it is and Dystopian Wars being how it is, it helps. It does help that because it does focus the game much more on those particular styles of play. That said, you can still do aerial versus aerial in one and aerial versus aerial in the other. Well-written rules should be the answer to that one. It's kind of very easy for me to throw that out there, but that
Well, it's what you were saying earlier.
Yeah.
A game's rule set should be able to scale and encompass every type of way you would like to play a game. So whether you go down the match play where your points are very precise and everyone's got an equal-sized army, or if you've got an idea for a narrative campaign where you're playing out the last stand or an ambush and one side's more powerful than the other, a good rule set will encompass all of those without you having to add tons of additional rules in one point or the other.
Yes, so that's something that we're very much keeping in mind. The way that you can judge if we've been successful with that is getting involved with the beta test when it comes out. It will be, I think it'll be pretty good. It will be better if people like yourself get involved and go, okay, well, what about this fairly extreme matchup or what have you, and then we need to look at that and make sure that that makes for a fun game. I've got no problem with something being challenging and a bit. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. But
well,
it's got to be fun though.
There was something, we had somebody suggested a change for Wild West Exodus. We tried it for a week, and after trying it for a week, we realised that it was interesting to try, but no, they really didn't work.
Yeah, sometimes giving something a go.
Something's obvious that it's not going to work.
yeah. But great question. Checking that, making sure that things aren't getting overpowered is going to be really important. As I say, the beta test is going to be the place where you're going to see if we've managed that, and if whether we have or we haven't, then your feedback will really make for a better game at the end.
I think that's all the time now we have for questions. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get through all the questions you submitted, but a transcript of what we have answered should be available later next week.
Yeah, I think transcript might be a little bit
a little written down version which summarises the things we've said. And as we said, this has been recorded, so you'll be able to download it and watch it yourself. Again, if there was anything you missed or you came in late, that's fine.
What I'm intending to do is to put together a bit of a blog post which will cover all of the key points, the questions and the key information that we've got there, just without all the ums and ers and cheese wheels and things that we've talked about here. Also, I'll try and get some pictures so that when I'm doing stuff like this, actually you know what it is I'm holding up. So, yeah, okay, Lee. So, thanks ever so much for joining us. Sorry we overran a bit, but hopefully there's been some good stuff for you. We'll do another one of these in the future. We'll announce
near future probably, because they seem really popular. So let us know.
If we don't speak to you beforehand, have a great Christmas and New Year, and we'll see you in 2018.
Good night.